Welcome to Cracking Cancer, where we tackle the tough questions about cancer with real patients and world experts. Our mission is to empower the cancer community through education, bring transparency to the oncology system, and drive funding for critical cancer research. Whether you're facing a diagnosis, supporting a loved one, or simply here to learn, we're here to bring clarity, hope, and action to the fight against cancer. Hey everyone, welcome to Cracking Cancer. I'm Kyle Concannon. I'm a physician scientist at MD Anderson, and I am here joined today with Yvonne Diaz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yvonne Diaz, and I am living with stage 4 ALK positive lung cancer. I am on the board of an organization in the US called ALK Positive Inc., and I'm a volunteer for them. And I also co-founded an organization here in the UK where I live in London called Oncogene Cancer Research, where we're focused on helping to empower patients, champion advocacy, and also accelerate research.
Wonderful. And thanks so much for joining us today. We're talking about a topic of ways that patients and loved ones can incorporate positive change in the cancer community. This is for folks who are inspired. Maybe you're new to this field, new to this community, or maybe you've had patients in here or friends in here for a long time, and you want to know what can we do to incorporate positive change. Our hope is to discuss that because Yvonne is one of the, I guess, kind of front leaders of someone who is diagnosed and then really managed to make positive change in an outstanding way through research advocacy and inter-advocacy collaboration, really just getting a lot of people working together. So my first question for you, Yvonne, is I'd like to talk a little bit about what initially inspired you to get involved with advocacy. You're in the lung, in ALK positive group and other groups. What started all that?
Yeah. I mean, so before that, I had been, I think, like many of us who are diagnosed suddenly out of the blue with any form of cancer, right? You're living your life. I was a professional working mother, working for a big global multinational company, blissfully unaware that I could even get lung cancer. And then suddenly being diagnosed at stage 4, my kids were just 14 years old. I have twin boys, and it was quite a shock. And so at the beginning, I just felt like I'm going to be the most compliant person, patient I can ever be. I'm going to do exactly what my oncologist tells me to do. I'm going to take that pill and anything else he says to me to take. And then about 6 months in is when like the mental side effects really started to hit me, where I felt like when you're on a targeted therapy, in a way, you know that drug is going to fail you at some point. You don't know when. You can read up on all that data, and I felt like I was waiting for the drug to fail me, and it felt so passive and so helpless. So I started researching what was out there. I had joined the support groups, which I do encourage patients to do. There's so much, and I think all these cancers, right, they're getting ever more specific in terms of understanding what is a driver. So even to have like ALK positive is a smaller lung cancer, 5% of all lung cancers are 35% are ALK positive, and to have a support group that is made up of thousands of people with my exact cancer was amazing. And just finding, and they also tend to be very research minded, so there's a lot of people sharing research in there, and a lot of medical, unfortunately, patients, some of us, some of them have medical backgrounds, and they can help decipher some of the research, which is complicated for patients, right? We're not necessarily prepared to deal with the science. And anyway, so reading all of that, this is how I began to advocate for myself. And very soon I found like all of us have to take a role in informing and educating ourselves so we can really participate in what's called shared decision making today. And really from there, I got really interested in how can we advance the science, right? How can we advance research? Our lives are dependent on this. This is why we are living longer today. Back in the day with traditional lung cancer 20 some years ago, we all had the same terrible prognosis of general lung cancer. It's getting better because the treatments are ever more precise. That's because of research. We're still not there. We're still not far enough. So we need more research to continue that. And it's not just about advocating for my own specific type of lung cancer. It's really for all of us. There's some other ones that have even worse prognosis. So it led me into kind of another journey, like how can we work together to advance things faster? So I feel like as you're going through this, your priorities, your goals, your focus continues to evolve. And I think that's perfectly normal and fine. So it is part of discovering like what you're interested in and what you want to get involved in if you do want to get involved in advocacy.
Well, I love what you said about it started with advocating for myself. You were diagnosed with something that's relatively rare. Uh, and I like to tell patients when they have something rare, it's like, it's not rare to you. And I use that term in the research community too, because I studied not only ALK disease, but some other rare drivers, particularly in lung cancer. And it can feel really isolating when you have something that's a thin sliver and of the overall pie of who has cancer, and the people who are going to know intimately about that type of cancer and how that disease works are largely at these research institutions. The general oncologist may not know a ton about it. And I think in today's world, it kind of is impetus on there's pressure on the person who has it to, you know, um, access the knowledge that's publicly available, because I think, well, one, no one's more interested in you doing well than you are, you know,
Absolutely right.
so it's like you're hurting nothing by learning as much as you can about it. And a lot of times, I think with how much information is available to the patient, you can educate your providers. I don't know if you've ever encountered that, but I mean, I've been educated by patients who are really well knowledgeable about their disease. They know a small study that I wasn't aware of, or they know stuff that happened in laboratories that I hadn't yet seen. And that's helpful for me.
It's so helpful to hear that because I do think that's exactly true. My own experience, I'm treated at a leading comprehensive cancer center here in the UK, and in a way, I felt intimidated to say anything to my oncologist because I thought, will I insult him? Well, how can I possibly participate and add to this conversation? But again, I had read about the Bright Star study, which in ALK Positive was about doing consolidated therapy, came from MD Anderson originally, and it's been replicated in EGFR and others. And I just saw that patients were living longer if they had this local consolidated therapy. And so I thought, well, why not ask him if I'm a candidate again in this whole my TKI I know is going to stop working one day. How can I stay on it longer? And what was interesting is immediately he knew the study. He's like, of course. He's like, and I could just see his mind calculating. He thought, actually, you would be a good candidate. And it really just taught me I am teaching him how like active I want to be, maybe how aggressive I want to be treated as well, that I'm not going to just sit there. There are all kinds of patients. And I think, you know what, we all have to do what's right for us. Some people just want to be that compliant patient and just take the pill and not question, not spend their time thinking about it. For me, it is about I manage my anxiety and my mental health, I guess, by learning more and thinking about what can I do for myself? How can I help others to live longer? So I do think it's important, especially, but like you say, for those patients, and I've seen it as well in our community in the UK. I met a very young lady with ALK. She was 23 at diagnosis, she was on her third TKI and started to have all the CNS effects that you do have associated with this TKI. And she was just at a general cancer center. She complained to her oncologist, who was kind of like, I think she was like his only ALK patient. And he basically was saying to her, suck it up. This is what it is. Like, at least you're, almost like at least you're alive. Didn't know about dosing down,
Mhm.
all these things. So the poor thing, it's not until she went to a patient conference that we met by chance and she was telling me this, and I thought, have you heard about dosing down? Have you heard about like some, and I said, look, I'm not a doctor, but I've seen some information from the manufacturer. Let me send these slides to you that I saw presented at a conference, and you can have the right conversation with your oncologist. So it's even more important for those individuals who are at a general oncology center where they may treat every cancer under the sun. I feel bad for them. I just think about in lung cancer, like you say, you yourself, you work in ALK, right? You know a lot about ALK and other lung cancers, and there's stuff every day you're going to miss.
Yeah.
And why not have an open mindset and just, I don't also be mind, I don't mind being told, no, that's not for
Yeah.
you, or this study's not credible. Right. So I think I just want the opportunity to raise it and to be heard.
Well, and first, with a few clarifications for listeners, we're using the term TKI, which is
Thank you.
yeah. So this is a type of targeted therapy. They're pills that usually pills that people can take, and they are different than chemotherapy. They kind of specifically attack the cause of a particular cancer. So, and the term consolidation therapy means after you take really any systemic therapy, you can go in and kind of cut out or remove residual tumor. These are ideas that are a little new in the field right now. So they're controversial as to whether one would do them or not. And I think the point you're making is bringing this new idea, which is not standard of practice in almost anywhere, bringing that to someone who it's not really on their typical checkbox of what they're going to look into for care is appropriate, well received, and you know, and it shows um, that you're probably best served by by engaging with the research community in some way to see what's out there to kind of normalize things that are at that cutting edge. I think that's great. I think that's a way that the bridge between provider and patient is going to get stronger. And and to what you were saying, that patients, there are patients who go in and really, this is a pretty overwhelming process. It's very complicated. Cancer is so complicated, and a lot of people are very comfortable going in and trusting the physician, the oncologist, the oncology team, pretty entirely, and that's great. Like that's our job. But there is a growing, I think, group of patients who are really wanting to take a little more of a driver's seat in directing where their care goes. And I think with the tools we have available now, not only is that something I encourage, uh, but also I think that's how the field is going to be pushed further. Like I think we can almost like crowdsource the good ideas now. The barrier between uh, being a novice in cancer medicine to being an expert or an expert in your area, that's getting easier to bridge now. Yeah, I'm curious. You're someone who you've been in the ALK community now for a while. When you started, you presumably were not an ALK expert, but you're now talking about these studies and you're very integral in the ALK community now. I knew your name before you knew mine. Um, I'm curious, what are some of the barriers, either, you know, true barriers or perceived barriers, social barriers that prevented you from getting involved with research efforts, or you think would prevent other patients from getting involved with research efforts?
Mm. No, so many good points, and thank you also for clarifying some of that language because I do think that's a danger. In the beginning, none of us understand these terms, and as you do go in, the danger is you start using them yourself, and I have to remember
Yeah.
back my early days where I was like, what is LCT, local consultative therapy, et cetera, and all these terms. So the language itself, I think, is a barrier, and it's quite
Yeah.
intimidating. I don't have a science background at all. I work in communications, which is maybe helpful in a way because I am used to hearing about things that I don't understand and thinking about how can I make the general public understand this. And so that's what I try and do. But I really understand still every day I'm being educated and learning, and I like the learning. So I think patients might themselves think, what can I contribute, right? I don't know the science. But that's not what you're there for as a patient supporting research. You're there for the lived experience. You understand best what is acceptable, what it's like to live with a disease every day, what the symptoms, how they impact your day to day, the side effects, all of these things. There's so much insight that we can bring into the research and the research process. So I think for us sometimes like just giving us the credit that we have value to add. I think in the research community, sometimes, you see it every day. I think we're still very new amongst
Mhm.
researchers, industry, and patients at knowing how and where to work with each other. And so, what I'm seeing is often, and now there's a mantra that you can't really introduce a research project without a patient or patient group backing it. So what is difficult is we're often seen as a bureaucratic hoop to that research, and then like invited at the last minute, when the whole idea is ready to sign off. I'm doing this paper tomorrow, like I need to my deadline's now, and it's been or I've already done this, that, and the other. Just put your name on it. And I think we need to do more than just put our name on it. We need to help understand and add the value. And if someone's coming to us when they're not willing to change the project, I think it's a shame, because when you look at clinical trials that fail, and there's I've read a couple stats and they vary widely from like 66 to 85% fail, it's often because of the enrollment.
Yeah.
And that's because they don't understand either where patients, the lived experience, right? What's really truly happening, or clinicians maybe don't want to put their patients forward because they don't see the toxicities having a benefit.
Mhm.
Right. And so that those conversations potentially could have advanced that. And delaying research hurts us all. It hurts the patients, it hurts the researchers, it hurts, the progress. Anyway, so look, I could wax on about that every day, but in terms of to come back to your question, I think so sometimes the limitations are our own thinking. I do think it's not easy to navigate these things. Frankly, I'm still working it out myself. I don't think we have a clear process, but there are groups out there. So I do think if someone's out there and wants to get involved in research, obviously I know the lung cancer one, so there might be others for other cancers, but in the US, there's a research advocacy network, which is a great way to start with the education of yourself. There's all these online classes. I think they also do some meetups. I live in London, so I'm not as close to them, but there is the ISLAC organization, the International Association for the Study of Lung Cancer, and they do amazing training for advocates who are interested particularly in research. And then in the EU, we have UPATI, EUPATI, and the We Can network. And they, again, all run all kinds of patient education classes, some of them in person, some of them online. And so I just think if you are interested, don't be intimidated. Start networking yourself. Find a group that awards grants. Again, in lung cancer, there's a Lung Cancer Research Foundation, and I know a lot of great advocates involved with them, and they get involved in awarding grants. And again, they don't have to necessarily understand the science, but the idea of representing that patient voice and helping to move the science forward, there's lots we can do. And then there's ways of being networked. I think it's hard to navigate it on your own. I think people can. Not all patient advocates even want to join groups, but I think don't be afraid to reach out and also be a member of a few. Sometimes I also think people just think they have to join one group. They don't want to get attached to one group. And I think this is where, monogamy is maybe not the way forward in these things. This is where you can have a few little relationships
Yeah.
and just work out. There's different groups for different things. So join them, find the like-minded people, patient advocates, and others. Like, it's amazing how people want to help you. When you start having these connections, people do want to help you. It becomes easier, but you have to be networked into these things.
Well, and when someone is going through this process, they're interested in participating, what do you think is the level of knowledge that someone has to have about the sciences? You mentioned not coming from a science background, but I can imagine someone in the rural US or, you know, wherever who isn't well established in this stuff, but they're passionate and they're like, I don't know anything about this world. You know, do you need to bring yourself up to speed in any way? Or is that the role of the advocacy organizations?
I would say no, but I also think you have to speak to the groups, and I think there should be this relationship two ways. I've been a patient rep on some things, and some of them are so sciencey, you just do think, why am I even here? Honestly, I have to
Yeah.
say that, because the science is just going over my head. It's not like using my time wisely, and I don't think I'm adding value. And at the end of the day, especially when you are living with the cancer, time is the most precious commodity we do not have. And joining these things where again, we're a tick box. People want to say, oh, I have, X patient
Yeah.
advocate or this group with me, and they're not being respectful of how they use your time. I don't think that's helpful to you. So I would say you have to find the relationship where they want to listen to you. And there is a bit of a connection. So I think it's important, like you would take any job, to take that relationship in the same way. Speak to them. How are you going to use my time? Is there compensation involved, right? A lot of people expect patients to do a lot of these things for free. And that's something that we also do need to look at. Sometimes, already we're not, maybe we're having trouble even with employment, or even if you're not, if you want to do it for free, which a lot of my things, I don't necessarily ask for a fee, and where I am paid a fee, um, I donate it to my organization. But I do think it's not fair if that is going to limit who you're going to get involved, right? Whose voice is going to be, we're not going to get people who need the help, their voices. And we talk about equity in research and representing everyone. Well, certain communities already have a hard time. And if we're not thinking of how we work with them, how we can bring them in, that's an issue. But again, if you're interested in, you really have something contribute. I think your voice is around the lived experience. It doesn't have to be around the science. If they're going to be highly technical, ask yourself, is this the right project for me? Perhaps it's not. So don't be afraid to walk away either. Find the right one where you feel valued, where you can contribute, and likewise, where someone wants to hear your voice, not just to see you in the room so they can tick the box.
But I like what you said about trying to focus also on equity within research and who is able to have a voice at the table. Uh, to me, what that says, I came from a very rural area, and my family has no healthcare literacy. I'm the, no one's medical in my family, and I really had this strong feeling that they were one world and I was from a different world, and these worlds don't really interact. Like I grew up feeling all these, people in medicine and people in research were just kind of a different class of human. They speak differently, they had better clothing, like all those things. It just seems so different. And I think what I've learned as I've progressed is there is a divide. And the people who are from those areas, if you don't have a lot of knowledge about this field, and if you're feeling like you're drowning and you're overwhelmed and this is all confusing, then we need to hear that. Like there is a desire to hear that perspective, and particularly in research, because we're designing these trials, we're doing, we're designing therapies, we're doing preclinical research on mice and in cell lines in the laboratory, with the idea that someone is going to ultimately have access to this medicine. And if we're coming up with regimens and the research world is pushing in one direction that isn't accessible to you, then that's something that's really worth noting. Like we need, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you're saying I'm from rural Montana and I can't get these cellular therapies where they're infusing T cells and your body's immune cells back into you at a really big center that that you have to fly to get to, then that's important information for people to know. So I think no matter what the knowledge base is, whatever background someone comes from, uh, the more intimidated you feel, it's probably the more we probably need that perspective, because it
Absolutely.
shows that the gap is bigger, and your demonstration that we need to close that gap.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. I mean, same thing. My parents were Cuban immigrants to the U.S. I
Yeah,
grew up there, and they didn't finish high school, so I'm the
yeah.
only one in my family to go to university. And in the cultural thing, it's all very complicated. So it is intimidating. But I just encourage anyone, like, you know, just guide yourself. Go follow your instincts if it feels right to you. And I can imagine perhaps I sound like I understand more than I do sometimes, but using the words, and I still know every day I'm learning. But I have an interest in learning. And also at the same time, I don't want to, I think I have value to bring. And so just knowing that at the end of the day, what the people in the room often don't do. And it's really interesting sometimes to ask. A lot of people working on our cancers may never have met someone with that specific cancer. It's quite remarkable when you think you're
Yeah.
working on a problem, you've never even spoken to someone who lives with this condition. And that kind of understanding can really help. And maybe they prefer to speak to a clinician, but even a clinician, they look at the data, they don't really know what it's like to live every day with your disease. That is a really important thing that you own, if you that you have. And if you're speaking with other patients, likely it's normal. It's amazing how once you enter this cancer world, I have so many friends all with my condition and other related ones, and other cancers even. It just interests me in the problems they're facing, and how the research is advancing for them, because it's such an important thing all of us rely on.
Yeah, and I think, what you mentioned there, that a lot of people that are doing the research on this may never have interacted with someone who has the disease, is very real. And the consequence of that is really tangible. I work in the laboratory, and the natural flow of research progression is building on things that you've already established to be true, and then you learn more, and then you learn more. But the direction that flows can be clinically meaningful, or it can be less clinically meaningful. And you can understand a process that's going on in a cancer, but whether or not you can manipulate that into a treatment, that's something that you need someone who's on the other end saying, wait a minute, like, what you're saying is very academically interesting, maybe, but or not if you're my grant reviewers. But how is this going to translate into helping people? And I think we in the research community, we want to put in what we think is most likely to get funded. Like, we want to push things forward that we think are promising. We want to contribute to the academic literature, but sometimes we're so close to the problem, and we can see how it could one day be helpful, but you need someone to step back and say, actually, there's a valley between where you are and what you're seeing that you're just too close to appreciate. So I think in uh, in interpreting a lot of the research funding, which LC, the lung cancer group that you work with, they give out grants. Actually, I think all the groups you work with give out
Right.
grants.
Yeah.
I think I've submitted to those organizations, and I can attest that that patient perspective is probably what didn't get my stuff funded, but I still advocate for it. Um, so it's really necessary that even not having all of the information about the disease isn't necessarily the missing link that you provide.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, all of you know the science, right? You're not coming to us to bring that value to you. It's the other side of what matters, what's important, what's the day-to-day like. And so I think that's interesting. And yeah, I love
And
what you're saying there.
when I think of patient interaction in research, largely I think through patient advocacy organizations. Is that your framework too, or what are other ways that patients can get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's power in numbers, and again, it's interesting because being part of, not just one organization. So a lot of people, it's interesting. So I first joined ALK Positive. It was a natural progression for me. This is the type I have, and these
Mhm.
guys, they're big. They're doing exactly what I care about, research. They're interested in doing all the patient education, the empowerment and funding research. They do second opinions for those who can't. These are all really much needed things. So that's where I started to get involved. And then since I live in London, and ALK Positive's mission is globally, but a lot of the, so far to date, all the funding has been funded in the US. And I think the reality for us living with a cancer is when you're running through your treatments, you're relying on that clinical trial as well, right? It's that lifeline you might need, and it might come sooner. People think of it from when they're out of options and all that. But anyway, living here where I live in the UK and in other countries, you see the exact same problem. People want the clinical trials coming to their countries. They want research being done there. There's good thinking everywhere around the world. So I just think we just do need to leverage where are all the greatest research minds. How can we bring them together and advance things? So I think, but I've also met a lot of independent patient advocates. So you don't have to join a group if you really don't want to. And some of them can do really great work. And it just depends on your interest. There's so many different areas to get involved in. Some here in the UK, again, when they're introducing medicine, they have to, go through a whole what they call the health tech assessment process, HTA, and they involve patients in voicing an opinion. Behind that, you can get involved in that. There's different groups. Again, all kinds of things. So it just depends on what your interest is, how you want to spend your time, what your skills are, what your contributions are. So I think you can work it alone. I do think organizations, because people come to them. A research, it's hard for researchers, I imagine. I don't know, Kyle, how you do this, but like, how do you find the patient organizations, right? To know, how do you know I'm working on this? I need to speak to a patient. How do I find them? So often think, should there be like a big patient organization navigator for all of you to know these are the advocates and patient organizations and what they do and what they're interested in, and ask them some questions. We are often very interested in helping the research. When someone, I think what industry and sometimes researchers don't realize is we're paying attention at all the times. Even when you don't realize or you don't think you're communicating with us, you are. We are reading your stuff that you put on social media, that you're publishing. So we're very interested in your work. Oftentimes it's difficult because it's not written for us. So we're trying to decipher and find meaning. And so I do think lay abstracts should be like something that's almost mandated, like what was this thing about and what ultimately did you find, right? So I think that would be a big help in bridging that gap between research and patients. But anyway, so we're constantly paying attention. We're very interested in your work because at the end of the day, it's what's kept us alive to date. It's what's going to help us tomorrow. So, and for patients, I think if you don't want to be part of a group, you don't have to. But I also think don't be afraid to reach out to them, even if you want to remain independent and do your own thing. They'll often involve you in whatever work. So, Go To for lung cancer is very good at congressional going after policy and making a case for more federal funding, which obviously this year is not so great, but but we still have to do it. And but different groups are really good at certain things. Why not leverage those networks? Just take advantage of it, join in, and you might like them, you might learn something, you might find other people you want to work with. So I just feel by connecting yourself, you're going to empower yourself and help further your own goals.
One thing I'd like to hear your thoughts on that my thinking has changed over time is the involvement of patient advocacy with pharmaceutical companies. I started my medical training in, so I did my medical school in the University of Vermont, which is, if you go to conferences, I think if you're from Vermont, you're still not allowed to get like the free coffee that whatever company hands out. Like they're very anti-pharma in that they don't want a negative bias, and biases are real whenever you work with anybody. That's just how that's how human interactions go. But over time, I've worked more and more with pharmaceutical companies and realized that they're not, in my experience, they're not people twisting their mustaches trying to exploit human suffering for their own profit. um, that's my controversial take on pharma, and there's a lot of back and forth between academics and pharma that I didn't appreciate. People will go become some head of a department, and then they'll come back to pharma, or they'll come back to academics. Um, and I have seen some patients in these pharma meetings. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, they are making the drugs for us. And by
Yeah.
informing that thinking, why not? They're working for us. I mean, so I know they are profit-making organizations, but at the same time, they do care. I think they are working on our indications. They need to understand the patient voice. If they're not, again, meeting us and understanding what we will and won't tolerate, um, then it's a real miss. And it's a real miss for us if we just think, no, they're, that's separate and not. I can't see why not. And I do think they do, the ones that I have experience in speaking with, they are interested in the patient voice and in different
Mhm.
formats. You'll be invited to perhaps an advisory board. Sometimes, it's more about sharing your story and experience because again, I think inside, and I've done this a couple times where I've been invited to tell my story, and I think, you know what, maybe someone in the mailroom, maybe someone like, do only the people working in the lab feel motivated to come into work every day? And I think at the end of the day, it's the combination of every single person inside that organization doing their part, whether they work on the taxes or whether they are in the mailroom or in the lab floor. The combined efforts of all of their work is what brings that new treatment forward, what allows them to make that mission. And also by perhaps understanding what's not working so well with their current treatments, maybe they'll invent something that will deal with that. We're seeing that now. I think Cocoon, there's something looking at skin toxicities, which a lot of patients talk about with certain treatments that you wind up with, like in skin toxicities. I feel like it's not a label. When you look at people who are having these things, like it's just stuff that, you know, really it's debilitating. It can be debilitating the way some people experience. Some of my friends have some serious issues, but by them understanding this is like life limiting. Yes, your drug is keeping me alive, but it's also having these other issues. And getting them to think about, okay, is there another thing we can do, or is there a way to tweak, how can we take care of this? So I think it is by sharing the experience around that we truly understand each other. We have to realize there is a symbiotic relationship here.
Yeah, and you know, I love what you mentioned about the person in the mailroom. Like, how do you influence the culture at a given institution or yeah, I mean, academic institution, but also in pharma. In academics, we it's universities usually, they have laboratories, they have clinical trials, but you also, you do have people who are seeing patients there. And when you go to pharmaceutical companies, that level of direct involvement and inspiration is lacking, but they do care. Like they work at a place where they're producing life-saving therapies. They may get money for it and quite a bit of money, and that's a different question. It's a different argument we could have. But they are there for a mission. And I'm sure they have their own mission statements. They have I mean, you can think about it this way. If you're profit driven, the way they get most profit is by selling the most highly effective medicine, like getting the most people to take the most effective thing. And if you're on the receiving end, if you're the patient, you share that. Like you also want the most effective thing to be accessible to you. Um, there's a book that I have over here that I reference seemingly every episode, The Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which I recommend everyone read. And to be an effective organization does require having that thread of mission, that shared mission that everyone in the organization buys into and agrees with. But it's a lot harder to do that when you don't see the person you're trying to help. So
Exactly.
yeah, I love the idea of working with these organizations. Maybe you could speak a little bit to like you mentioned an ad board, or like what do these look like? What happens?
Yeah. So I've been a part of a couple of them, and it really depends, I guess, on what they may be reviewing. So some might want to look at, oh, this is our patient journey. Can you just help us understand the steps on, so they might be helping you solve a problem for them to understand what we care about. And again, really interesting. It's nice to see that they are interested in what the whole experience is for us, right? From the minute we're diagnosed and to, going on treatment where we find information. There's a lot of onus around shared decision making, like we say, and educated patients can better advocate for themselves. And so it's in all of our interests to have these right and better conversations. So from so far, the ones I've done have really been held online because often they are global in nature, right? And they're bringing together people from all over the world. So there'll be an agenda. We'll all be reflecting and reacting to information on screen, but it's quite respectful, and I find it rewarding because they appear so like interested in what we have to say. They're like, wow, I didn't know that. And just to think like, because again, you might think these are really awfully clever people. For sure, they've heard it all before. They've seen it all before. What can I possibly add to the conversation? It's quite remarkable, actually. And even the thing I was saying at one point just before about we're watching you, and I said that in a recent ad board I was in, and I said, you might think you're communicating to shareholders. Do you realize we're reading that stuff too? I don't personally like being looked at as a market, but I understand, that this is how it's being communicated. But I do think it's important for them to think about that. If you're communicating to investors and talking about this great target market, think about the patient on the other side that's like, this is my life.
Yeah.
Right? And how does that sound to you? And to have a drug company walk away because there wasn't enough interest in that drug when the drug is working. I mean, that's heartbreaking stuff. And so just to know we are listening to what you say at all times. But anyway, I divert a little bit there. But I do think it's interesting to be a part of these things in terms of to informing and educating. Again, coming back to what I said about the mailroom to the lab floor to everybody, helping to connect them around the mission. If everyone does their job a little bit better, the mail is delivered. Maybe there's something really important in the post that day that has to be open, so they have a new insight, and you'd think they'd use email or something else. But anyway, um, that's the point: is how can we all contribute to getting to that shared mission, which has to be around improving and extending lives.
Well, and specifically to that example, what a lot of people don't appreciate in pharmaceutical companies is that the vast majority of what they do fails. And this is true in academics too, but the people who work at a pharmaceutical don't see the patient every day. So it's really hard to stay aggressively motivated when the failure rate's so high. And even the stuff that goes to trial, like the most impressive stuff that they've done all their studies, it looks like it's going to be tolerated, they're curing mice, and then it goes to trial and it fails. And not only have they invested a ton of money, but people, I mean, this makes or breaks departments. This is what everyone has been working for years to get to trial. And after that failure, to be able to see someone who you're trying to help and, kind of realize what you're doing all this for and get back on the horse and get after it. People need that. I mean, these are still just humans. Everyone gets discouraged. And we need to keep having that interaction with the thing that drives us, or else it stops, the drive gets decreased. And that's not what they want either. They worked really hard to get into those positions to make a difference. Um,
Yeah, and
speak,
it's hard for us when we
yeah,
see that happen, by the way, as well. It's
yeah,
it's really debilitating. Like we're hopeful, like this is all looking promising, and then again, you're nervous. Like, when am I going to progress? And that next thing was looking good. Already, you're looking at quite a long timeline, right, for basic
yeah.
research to get out the door, and you just hanging in there trying to kick the can down the road, and seeing that fail is heartbreaking to us as well. So, if speaking to a patient makes them think about, is there anything in here that I can reuse, whether don't try that again or maybe tweak it this way. Um, I don't know. But if it helps people get back on their mission, then that's worth it.
Well, along the lines of uh, integrating into research, pushing things forward, getting things to happen faster, being inspiring, all those are true. A lot of patients, when they think about research, they're thinking clinical trials, which is and they should be. That's the most tangible thing that can potentially benefit someone. How can patient advocates, shape the clinical trial landscape, either from how a trial is designed? You mentioned recruitment, implementation, things like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to definitely have patients involved in every stage, right? Not just at the end. Sometimes what I see in my experience and all the organizations I'm connected to is that people think of us at the time of enrollment. I need those patients. Ah, where's that group? Let me talk with them. And certainly they themselves, a lot of the research and industry companies we do work with, they look at it's amazing how fast you can enroll a trial when you get a patient group behind you, giving you that platform. But also, like you said, the failures, it's that voice in the beginning, understanding, and we've seen it from multiple groups. I've heard stories passed around where someone was going to introduce a treatment where they excluded certain standard of care treatment lines. It's like, you're not going to enroll patients. That's not the lived experience today. That's not the patient experience. You go on these treatments before you go on this thing. So if you're excluding that, you're trying to get this like mice-like situation, right? Because when you're working on mice, you have these mice who like have immune deficient, bodies, whatever, and you inject them with the cancer, and then start growing. You perfectly treat them. People don't live that way, right? We've already had certain things, different exposures. So how do you really reflect that? Your success is our success. So we have to work together from the very beginning. And sometimes that can be working on, I'm a patient rep on a current um, trial now. It's this cancer-related cachexia, which is a very debilitating condition that certain cancers can develop. It's a wasting syndrome, and it's typical in pancreatic, lung, and what's the other one? Colorectal, I believe, are the big three that this happens in. And just insights like that come sometimes from patients, knowing that actually cachexia tends to happen in older patients, and they're working on young mice, and actually just working on old mice. Like, how do they behave when you start trying to give them a treatment, right? So again, understanding this has a lot with appetite control. So people who have had a lot of issues um, with their cancer, when I was diagnosed, I certainly didn't want to eat anything. I couldn't eat anything, and understanding what I wanted to eat. I'm not a mouse. They're trying to give the mice protein and they're not eating the protein. It's like, well, actually, carbs are easier to get down your throat when you are quite unwell. They almost like a croissant, like melts in your mouth, and other things like that. But anyway, just little insights like this into the science can like just give them a different view and think, okay, let's try this. So I think there's lots of different things. And again, finding these projects, we can contribute to the basic science. We can certainly contribute to the enrollment phase, but there's lots of steps in between, even the grants, right? What's important, what patients really want to see is that research project being driven by, academic or research curiosity rather than a real patient need. Is it being, for a pharma, is it being driven by a competitor's pipeline, right? You're like, oh, everyone's talking this, let me move over there. It's like, well, is that really what the patient also wants? Just talking with patients, you're going to get a different perspective. So for me, we need to be involved in all the different steps, and make it easy to work together.
The clinical trial example you gave, it definitely hits home. I think what a lot of people maybe sometimes forget is that a clinical trial is an experiment. It's an experiment with people, but we're testing something. We're looking to see if one treatment works better than another treatment, or if a treatment is safe, and when we're designing that experiment, we can design it to academically focused. So we're designing the best experiment. We want it to be the clearest answer that we can possibly make it. And we'll say, someone, as you mentioned, can't have had these therapies before, because when we did it in mice, they didn't have those therapies before. And your perspective is like, people are going to have those therapies. Like, no one would come to this if they hadn't had that. Like, this doesn't even make sense. But, and it dampens the ability to interpret the data a little bit, which is a us problem. Um, but it may, that perspective is like, no, here's the world we live in. And it sounds like you've already seen, like, this happens pretty frequently. I see studies published, and it's hard to interpret them. And if a study isn't doing something that represents what the patient's experiencing, it's not going to help determine what to do in that situation. One of the things today we see every now and again are still trials where the control arm is a placebo. And that's pretty rare, but it doesn't happen all that much. And, we have a lot of lines now, particularly in lung. We're very fortunate in that way.
Yeah.
But having a patient on those boards to say, I'm not going to sign up for nothing, that
Yeah.
really would drive who's going to
We
use that
can't. We
trial.
know the answer, right? We know the answer. Not being given a placebo, we know what happens. Do we, is that,
Right.
obviously you can't really do that. And is it ethical? And even sometimes there's lots of discussion around what they call the trial crossover, where
Mhm.
someone is doing poorly on the trial arm, and they know there's a better treatment. You need to cross people over, obviously, because we if it's not working for them, they need the next thing. And
Yeah.
instead of just kicking them off, can you put them on the superior line? I mean, there's, like you say, that's a you problem, and we need you guys to solve this for us, right? It's not going to be easy, but that's why all of you clever people have these fantastic jobs, and we need you doing them, because that's what your goal is, right? You do have the knowledge you need to. It's not going to be as clean, but that's not how the real world is.
Well, and speaking to this point of uh, adding different values within the research infrastructure, the patient adding the experiential value, the providers having a little more of the academic value. I think things work best when those two circles of the Venn diagram overlap as much as they can. And there's a strong push to educate providers about the experiential learning and everything that we need to incorporate by incorporating patient advocates into the trial designs, which is good. It's necessary, and you're discussing trials that bore the fruit of that. That we're designing trials now with that in mind. How can we, as academic communities, educate patients, or how can patients educate themselves more about their disease to feel more equipped, in these conversations to push the research forward?
Mhm. I mean, I wish there were one simple answer, honestly. And so I think definitely but there are groups out there. Again, I do think joining the different groups, the support groups, and a lot of the ones that I've seen, at least, and look, you have to look around, because not all of them are the same. And but the ones that are publishing information, and medically verified information as well, right? Because we're not medical doctors, and support groups are not there to give medical advice, but we do have vetted information that we can bring to the patients, and questions to ask, right? Um, Research to cite, going on these different groups, like I mentioned, that I'm sure every cancer must have them, even like ESMO and ASCO, if you're interested in that kind of thing, attending them and just seeing the presentations that are being provided. I have to tell you, in the beginning, it's a bit daunting, because every presenter has like 5 minutes to get through like 60 slides, and they're going through them at speed. But there are some good
For those
resources where
listening,
what's
these
that?
are the for those listening, these are the international conferences that like the whole cancer community comes to present like the most impressive research. The
Absolutely. And
ASCO is
yeah,
the
these are
American one,
pan
and ESMO is the
cancers.
European one.
Exactly. I mean, they're quite amazing to go there, but the wonderful thing is you meet other patient advocates
Mhm.
from all these different cancers, and again, like just speaking to others who are trying to do something similar to you, whether it's your own cancer or your own interests, right? You can really come across and network, and that's like your first step is educate and empower yourself, and then find these resources. And this is, I mentioned earlier, you, Patty, and We Can, and the Research Advocacy Network. I've learned that through speaking to people. I wish there was one like definitive go-to source and say, like, if this is what you're interested in, go here and there. But you do have to kind of navigate around and find these things. But depending on what you're interested in. And sometimes you might go to some of these things and find out it's not for you. I've also met patients who, someone went to one of these massive industry conferences and just thought like, ugh, boring, like so much science. It was just so not for me. I think, well, good. Sometimes you have to kiss a frog and determine that's not the one for you. And that's fine. Walk away. You did it. You got the certificate. And now, find the next thing. Right. But by talking to others, I think we can learn. And for me, I do like meeting the clinicians, the researchers, even the industry members of biotech companies, because to me, it's inspiring that here are all these like phenomenally clever people all working on our cancers. And to me, that is so hopeful. Just knowing that people out there, I just think, thank God every day that people like these are doing these jobs. And if I can provide an insight, can help in some way to move it forward, then, why not be a part of that? It's quite inspiring.
What do you think about people Googling or kind of going on their own adventure to learn about their cancer?
Yeah, it's so funny because that's the advice you're given when you're diagnosed is don't Google. And I think it's actually terrible advice. What they should tell you instead is these are some great organizations and some great sources to look at because, again, like this comes back to the more you're participating in shared decision making, but you're meant to be an active role. And here you are diagnosed with something. You're so vulnerable in that moment. You're scared for yourself, you're scared for your family, for all of it. And then you're told don't Google. And honestly, I kind of followed that, and I understand why, because the statistics are terrifying, and you might find the wrong sources. But I think instead, what the clinician should be doing is saying these are some really great credible organizations where you can find some good information. Why not give a patient a couple leaflets to walk out with? You're kind of sitting there sometimes just passively going through this process. You don't even understand what tests you're receiving, why you're waiting. The tests are endless. So I don't think it's good advice. I also think there's a danger sometimes, and you see it in different patient advocates. I used acronyms earlier, TKI. I didn't explain tyrosine kinase inhibitor, which is, specific to a targeted therapy that I take. But we can mistake those things. I see people doing some crazy clangers, how they referred like non-small cell lung cancer and CSC, whatever, and someone saying it's a
Yeah.
non-smoking lung cancer. I'm like, that's not what that stands for. But anyways, but
Yeah.
you see, non-small cell lung cancer. But anyway, so it is dangerous sometimes. You do have to check your sources, listen to people. Definitely, I think we like to listen to other patients, listen to others as well. Check not just once, but twice or more, get verified information. There are really good organizations who are really good at giving proper vetted, medically vetted, patient-friendly advice. The problem is sometimes when we are given the information, it's very technical, or when we find it ourselves. Um, there's a danger where people wanting to take, you see it in the support groups. Oh, I'm going to take dog deworming
Yeah.
things. And you just think, my goodness. And even wanting to go the vitamin route, right? Oh, I want to take it's natural. And I think, well, even natural things are foreign to your body. And now you're on some powerful drugs, and it's amazing what can interact with every single drug. So I do think, not to turn people off, because that's the first question sometimes we as patients want to do is, what can I do? Right? You feel so passive. I got to just do this thing, and like, how can I help? How can I be a part of it? And you're told, do nothing, just take the medicine. And you think, is there diet? And none of this stuff has been scientifically proven yet with most cancers, I believe. I don't know if any, but getting that information, finding out, am I doing something that's going to make things worse? It's really important to absolutely get the right source of information before you do
Yeah,
anything.
I agree. I encourage people to learn as much as they can about their disease, but not necessarily to trust everything without a filter,
Yes.
and don't take the statistics you see as though they're going to apply to you. All the data you're reading is old, and the this field moves very, very quickly. So, I share that. But before we have time here, what are some of the things that you're working on now? What are yeah,
Yeah.
your recent initiatives that
Thank
you'd like
you.
to
Yeah.
talk about?
So a couple things. So with ALK Positive, obviously, work with them, and we've been doing some really exciting things over there. We recently introduced a new scientific advisory board, which again, the organization's been doing fantastic work in terms of supporting science, advancing science, and our own trajectory as a patient organization there. We hired someone a couple years ago who is an MD, worked actually on the first ever ALK targeted therapy,
Oh yeah,
crizotinib, and then spent 20 years in industry. And so now he's helping
no,
to lead all of our medical teams. We have like a research medical team, a clinical trials team. We have our own translational research team, because there's all these people. Anyone can get ALK, and it turns out biologists, virologists, geneticists, professors, MDs get it, and so a lot of these people volunteer for the organization to help advance our work. And now, under Dr. Ken Culver's leadership, we're doing some really interesting work ourselves, and using the scientific advisory board to guide our own thinking, and even, obviously inform where we will put research funding. I co-founded Oncogene Cancer Research here, and really we're going through a bit of a fundraising stage, because we want to get to that stage. We've given out donations before, but we realize the best-in-class way of doing this is really to run formal requests for proposals where researchers will come to us. We'll just be giving some seed grants in the beginning, but again, for me, if that seed grant helps further research, then that's really important. We're also about advocating and trying to bring clinical trials to our country. So there's one in particular we're trying to bring to a couple. It's really hard to launch, to bring clinical trials into, I don't know, the country like UK. Maybe everyone has these issues, but there's very complicated. So working with, keep approaching different hospitals. Someone I know is, actually we have a good lead on one now. And then we're also doing patient education. So we are running our own educational series and just really trying to empower patients, whether it's just on self-advocacy, getting involved in advocacy, breaking down some of the same grid work you're doing here, Kyle, yourself, like breaking down the stigma. I think sometimes people get like, oh, I'm doing that. And I think, you know what? One day when we solve this problem, we can all go away and just enjoy our lives. For now, we need more people. So
Yeah.
I think the more of us are doing this thing, the more we champion each other and be each other's cheerleaders and sing each other's praises, the faster we're going to get things moving, and survival improved, and life, quality of life also improves. So I think we need more voices, not fewer. So no matter what a person interest is, you should look at that, even if it's just telling your story, if it's getting involved in research, and that's amazing too. um but anyway, so we're here working on different things, just trying to get all these initiatives moving. I didn't mention I'm a member of Lung Cancer Europe, which is another fantastic organization. They bring together all these different patient organizations across Europe, and again, they have like 42 members, I think, at present. And hearing from what is working in Slovenia and Ukraine and Germany, we're all learning from each other. It's really hard because you start these patient organizations. Like I said, I was working in business before. I didn't know any of this stuff. I've never run a charity. Now I'm doing it. So frankly, we're working it out as we go along. And by joining and working with a number, you get ideas from each other. And then still feeling that we all have that one thing in common, that cancer that we have in common. If we can focus on what we have in common and work together, we can also use our collective brands, networks, and power to truly make things move faster and become better for all of us.
Where can people go to support your initiatives?
Thank you. So we have a lot of information on our website, oncogeneresearch.org, and we're on all the social platforms that you might imagine. So even if if you're curious, please follow us. Follow our YouTube channel, Oncogene Cancer Research, where we will be launching some content. And if it's anything from sharing your story to breaking down research, whether you're a clinician, a researcher, anyone, we're interested in your work. And if you're working on lung cancer, that's of interest to us. So we want to break down information. We do plan to also talk about clinical trials that are going on, because sometimes it's really hard for patients to know where to go and what's going on. And so how can we create more awareness of these things and just um, help patients make those next choices?
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully, for those listening, this is an invitation to participate in the conversation. If you weren't already an active member, your voice is wanted, and no matter your level of knowledge in healthcare, your access, a lot of this stuff is remote. We want to hear we want to hear what you're going through, and you all have a unique perspective to bring, and that's really really valuable. Um, but this is it for our episode today. Thanks for joining us here at Cracking Cancer. You can learn more at crackingcancer.org, and remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Cracking Cancer. If you found this helpful, please like, subscribe, leave us a review, and visit crackingcancer.org for more information. Every dollar we earn goes directly to furthering the podcast and supporting vital cancer research. Because together, we can crack cancer.